everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're here with Peter Egan and Natasha Smith, and we're very happy to be talking to you about the problem with factory farming. Now, I'm here from Goodheart Animal Sanctuaries. I'm the Education and Outreach Manager. Peter is an incredibly talented actor and animal activist, and Natasha is the Senior Campaigns Manager for the UK. So we've all got a wealth of experience here, a wealth of knowledge, and we're all very passionate and excited to share these ideas with you. Now, thank you so much for joining us. If you do have any comments or questions along the way, please feel free to pop them in the comment section below, and our team will get back to you. I'm just going to start by giving you a brief overview of what we're looking at today, and then we will dive right in there. So we're going to start off with Natasha, who is going to be giving us a breakdown of the current state of factory farming in the UK. We're also going to be looking at the serious implications for environment, human health and animal welfare, and importantly, ways that you can get involved. I'm then going to be introducing you to our charity, Goodheart, and our farm sanctuary and what we do, what we're all about. And I also want to talk to you about how we promote compassionate change through our visitor experiences in particular. And finally, we're going to be hearing from Peter Egan, who is going to be talking about his experience as an animal activist and what you can do to help. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is pass on over to Natasha, who is going to give us a rundown of compassion in world farming and their important work.
Okay, so as I say, yes, wonderful to be speaking to you today. Quite a lot to cover here if we're talking about investigating, doing a bit of a deep dive into the many ills of factory farming. And so it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, really, of all of the knock-on effects and implications on not just animal welfare, but we're talking human health, we're talking biodiversity, the climate emergency. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. So first of all, the basics. What is the problem? Well, there's not just one, as I say, there are many. So first of all, immense animal suffering. We've got wild species being driven to extinction. I'll explore some of the reasons for that. Precious habitats that they inhabit being ravaged by factory farming. Huge greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, animal agriculture. Major environmental pollution, degradation of our soils, precious soils, human health increasingly at risk, and food insecurity as well. And what does all of this tell us? Well, that we've got a broken food system globally. So the solution to all this, well, it's simple. Less and better is our motto. So reduce our meat and dairy intake drastically, embrace a more plant-based diet, but also for those who are choosing to eat meat and dairy produce, opt for organic or pasture-fed, truly free-range options where you can guarantee that an animal has had a life worth living, where you've got transparency, you understand the conditions in which an animal has been reared, and just really taking that shift 3 times a day in what you're eating and helping us to build a better world for animals, peoples and the planet. Another key part of the solution is setting aside more land for nature. So one of the key problems is too much land is being converted for agricultural use, and it's desperately needed to support biodiversity. So that's a crucial part of this interconnected web of solutions. And farming practices need to be working in harmony with nature. So we're talking about regenerative agriculture, returning to sort of sustainable, extensive farming, protecting soils with rotational methods, preventing pollution from such high use of pesticides, fertilizers, and supporting wildlife. So replacing these monocultures that we have with polycultures, diverse flora and fauna. I'll go into a bit more detail about all of those aspects. So just a quick recap of how we've got to where we are now in this awful state where factory farming is so rampant around the world. Well, after World War II, the focus was on quantity, so producing maximum amounts of food at minimal cost. And unfortunately, there's a pervasive myth that has continued and continues to thrive today that's supported by a lot of corporate interests. So we're talking about investments in the chemical, fertilizer, pesticides industry, just huge companies that are still continuing to influence government policies and practices, even though we can see that this is a hugely outdated policy. So this common agricultural policy that was introduced after the Second World War, a subsidy scheme that was rewarding farmers based on yield, growing as much as possible. Well, now that needs to be entirely overturned, and I'll move on to talk about how in the UK we're moving towards that era. And I've touched on there this cheaper food paradigm. So essentially, this myth that because we've got an ever-growing population, the only way we can possibly feed so many people is to keep churning out more and more meat and dairy produce. Obviously, we know that's not the case, and we'll explore why. And we end up in this cycle of increasing production, intensive production, and that makes cheaper meat, and then consumption increases. More and more people are buying that cheap meat, so then production increases. So we go round and round, and it's just getting worse and worse. So interestingly, some of you might not know the origins of compassionate wild farming. Well, it was founded by Peter Roberts, who was a dairy farmer himself on a mixed farm in Hampshire. And he could see the way that intensive agriculture was going in this country, and just thought, no, I need to put a stop to this, and decided to set on this mission by setting up an organisation to end factory farming, and return to a method, system of farming where animals could enjoy a life worth living. So just a few early victories to recap as the organisation gradually grew from strength to strength over the decades. So we secured a UK veal crate ban in 1990. 1995, there was huge press coverage of protests against live exports from many ports across the country. And then a crucial one, secured recognition of animals' ability to think and feel in EU law in 1997, and that's going to come up a bit later on. 1999, a UK ban on sow stalls, which are still unfortunately used in many other countries to this day. So just a bit of an example of the journey we've been on, and obviously throughout the 21st century, we've just been expanding our ambitions and our reach worldwide as well. So I'll move on now to explore the animal suffering species by species that is at the heart of factory farming today. So I will put a warning out there that some of the images on this slide and the next few slides you might find a bit upsetting. So just a warning there. Some of them are taken from investigations that we've carried out at Compassion in Wild Farming. So to start with pigs. Well, in fact, the image you see here, we captured this in an undercover investigation that we ran back in 2019. So this was from a UK pig farm, and you can see the immense suffering. It's absolutely heart-wrenching to look at images like that. So 70% of UK piglets have their tails sliced off without any anaesthetic, and that is because in the conditions in intensive farms in the UK, they are more prone to aggression and stress and to biting each other's tails off. And so this is a method to prevent that, but it's it's horrific for the animals forced to endure this without anaesthetic. And despite the sow stall ban that I mentioned earlier, over 200,000 mother pigs, sows, still give birth and rear their piglets in cages called farrowing crates. Which is just an absolute travesty. Moving on to laying hens, well, over 16 million of these animals are farmed in cages, so-called enriched cages now in the UK, since barren battery cages have been banned, but enriched cages still do not offer anywhere near the freedoms that hens need to express their natural behaviours. For instance, each has barely more than a sheet of A4 paper to roam, and in the wild, roaming free, they would have plenty of space to spread their wings, to be dust bathing and to be flying up onto branches. Another practice that's incredibly cruel is beak trimming as well. It's similar in these conditions, because there can be more aggression in the stressful and overcrowded environments. The hens can be more likely to peck at each other, so beak trimming is to combat that, but again, it's incredibly cruel. So moving on now to broiler chickens, or chickens reared for meat. So the conditions in which, when they're intensively farmed, massive overcrowding. So similar to laying hens, the amount of space per animal is just tiny. And they are typically very fast growing breeds. They've been genetically engineered so that they grow unnaturally quickly to increase the turnover of meat being produced. And it just means that they end up with such a plethora of health conditions. So they struggle to, as they grow in size, to support their own weight, to walk around. They have heart disease, they have many different types of health issues. And in these huge sheds, they can suffer heat stress from the temperature differences. The air quality becomes poor. They're often sitting on wet litter, and the ammonia is very damaging over time. So these are really horrendous conditions. Moving on to sheep, now obviously more commonly farmed extensively here in the UK, but there are still welfare issues to consider. So lambs, for instance, like piglets, are commonly tail docked. They can be castrated without anaesthetic as well, that can happen. And then thousands of sheep are exported each year, as I'll go into, on long, exhausting journeys to the continent. And moving on now to dairy cows. So they've been modified over time to produce higher and higher milk yields. And that causes awful health problems such as mastitis, so inflammation of the udders. And when they're forced to live, even if not all of the time indoors, even when they are kept indoors on hard concrete floors for long periods, that can cause medical problems, lameness from foot lesions. They're also separated from their calves within just 24 hours of giving birth, and that really disturbs the natural mother-calf bond that should be formed. And there are still some zero grazing systems where, although there might be some form of outdoor access for cows, for the vast majority of the time they don't have access to pasture. So that's you know a real source of stress and animal cruelty. Then in terms of male calves, now obviously they can't be reared to produce milk, so unfortunately many of them are either shot at birth or they're exported live for fattening and slaughter overseas, and these are often unweaned calves. And it's incredibly stressful. I'll go on to talk about our campaigning on behalf of these unweaned calves forced to endure such horrors. And it's really important for us to talk about fish as well, because they're sort of the forgotten farm animals, and it's only just the case that more and more organisations and consumers are starting to wake up to the fact that fish are factory farmed and they have feelings, and they are thinking, intelligent, sensitive beings as well, like all other land-based farm animals. So there's this real lack of awareness that persists around the need to protect fish welfare. And still there are many types of, many instances of inhumane slaughter, so slaughter without stunning. So important now to move on to the wider impacts of factory farming. So our global food system is now the primary driver of biodiversity loss. So that's the loss of diverse flora, fauna, wildlife around the world. And agriculture threatens 86% of the world's most endangered species on the planet. So that's, I think, 24,000 out of 26,000 of the world's most endangered animals. That's shocking. And so why is this? Well, this is because of land that's cleared for livestock, for rearing livestock, and land cleared to feed livestock around the world. So that's to create soya. So I talked about these monocultures earlier, where previously on the land you would have had mixed, basically lots of diversity of flora and fauna, and then it's being cleared and replaced with just soya plantations, palm plantations, and that's used as livestock feed for intensively farmed cattle and other animals. So what this results in is habitats being destroyed, and the land can no longer support biodiversity. Also, the overuse of pesticides in industrial farming can harm other wildlife, So that has this damaging knock-on effect. Not only are you finding that the land is gone that once provided so many different nutrients to support different life systems, but the crop that is there is covered in chemicals that are damaging wildlife too. And then looking at the climate emergency we're in. Now we're only just starting to see more awareness being raised of the links between factory farming and the climate emergency. So our food system worldwide accounts for 30%, so almost a third of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. And farming animals causes 16.5% of those emissions. It also accounts for 44% of all methane emissions, so that's from cows, and 53%, so over half of all nitrous oxide emissions, and that's from largely from fertilizer use. So what's happening here is that we're depleting resources of oxygen and we're increasing carbon dioxide as well as the methane production and the nitrous oxide production. So we've got intense fertilizer use, producing nitrous oxide and causing these so-called dead zones where algae bloom very, very quickly, and then they die very, very quickly, and then they leave behind oxygen depleted water that cannot support life anymore. So a crucial point as well is the damage to our soils by overworking the soils in intensive farming. The soils are less able to capture carbon. So it's very interesting that soil, it actually plays this vital role, not just in supporting, I think 95% of the food we produce, but also with carbon sequestration, so capturing carbon from the atmosphere. And when that's not happening, when the soil is being overworked and damaged with intensive farming, carbon is remaining in the atmosphere. So again, increasing carbon dioxide emissions. Also, we've got the destruction of wildlife. And so it's not just in the soils that we're failing to capture as much carbon, it's in hedges that are being cleared, it's in trees, forests, rainforests that are being cleared, and those are the precious ways that we can stop carbon being so widespread in our atmosphere. And the whole system of factory farming is so energy intensive, using so much water, and just the processes of producing and distributing, transporting huge quantities of factory farmed food. That's all producing carbon dioxide emissions as well. And as I mentioned, very water intensive to support intensively farmed livestock. So it accounts for actually around 70% of all world water use. So the bottom line of all this is the more natural habitats that we convert into farmland for farming animals, the more emissions are going to rise and the worse our climate crisis will become. And we really need to wake up to that fact. So crucially, there's the impact on humans as well in so many different ways. So intensive farming is very inefficient in terms of the calories and the nutritional value that we get from the food system, this intensive food system. Every 100 calories in edible crops that are fed to livestock, they result in us just consuming, with meat and dairy products, 17 calories. So that's obviously incredibly wasteful, doesn't make sense. And if the food products that are being fed to animals were actually used for human consumption directly, we could resolve major issues of world hunger. We could feed an extra 4 billion people on the planet. We've also got major health issues associated with factory farmed produce. So factory farmed meat more likely to be heavily processed, which, as we know, has connections with heart disease, diabetes, even certain cancers. And there are so many, real growing numbers of people who are suffering undernutrition or malnutrition with really poor meat-heavy, meat-reliant diets. And that's a growing problem. We've also got pollution. So I talked a bit about water pollution with nitrous oxide from fertilizers, but also air pollution. So if we halved agricultural emissions, we could prevent 250,000 air pollution deaths every year. That's incredible. And a crucial point I'll get onto later is the overuse of antibiotics in intensive farming. So this increases antibiotic resistance in human infections. So it's putting us more at risk of antibiotic resistance. And there's also a huge amount of food waste linked to factory farming. So up to a third of edible food that could be consumed by humans is wasted, around 1.3 billion tonnes a year. That's colossal. Finally, very topical, of course, pandemic risk. So these cramped, intensive, confined conditions are a breeding ground for diseases to spread, for viruses to spread. So it is true that the next pandemic could start on a factory farm. That's a real prospect that we need to confront. So I'll move on now to be a bit more specific about the situation with factory farming in the UK today, a bit about our work in the UK and what we're doing in Europe as well, touching a bit on that. So this has been a huge talking point in the past couple of years, continues to be, trade in the UK after Brexit. So as we all know, having left the EU, the UK can now set its own trade policy, and that's for the first time in over 50 years. And it's important to note that the government claimed early on in negotiations that in all our trade negotiations, we will not compromise on our high environmental protection, animal welfare and food standards. So we've got a clear guarantee there. What's actually ended up happening, and I won't go into too many details about the ins and outs of different legislation, but the government has repeatedly refused to introduce meaningful legal protections against lower standard food imports, so cheap, low welfare produce that's undercutting UK farmers, and it's resisted any meaningful parliamentary scrutiny of free trade agreements. And so to go into a bit more detail about that, the Agriculture Act, that's now passed, it's come into law. This replaces the common agricultural policy that I mentioned earlier, the subsidy scheme that was rewarding farmers based on yield. And this is positive because it follows this mantra of public money for public goods. And that is set to include farm animal welfare and things like rewilding, supporting biodiversity. So rewarding farmers who are delivering on farm animal welfare and helping to support the environment. However, UK farmers could be undercut if in new trade deals, we allow cheaper, low welfare imports from countries that produce food in a way that doesn't actually meet our standards, where corners are cut. And then we've got the trade bill, and this is kind of reaching the end of the road now in terms of our influence on the agricultural aspects. So parliamentary scrutiny of new deals, essentially the ability of MPs to vote to input into trade deals that are put forward, is possible. However, there's no guaranteed vote as it stands for MPs on new deals that are coming through. And that's a huge disappointment for us. We've campaigned really hard, along with other organisations, to have that crucial scrutiny so that our political representatives are being held to account when negotiating deals that could shape the future of farming for this country and for millions of animals for years to come. There is no legal requirement for food imports as it stands to meet UK standards, as was promised on the, you saw that on the previous slide. So no guaranteed protection for animals, farmers or consumers from lower welfare imports. And that's shocking, it's hugely disappointing. So just a little bit about the deals that have already been struck, and there has been quite a lot of news coverage around this. Japan, EU, Canada, we've still got the deals to be agreed with the US and Australia, so we'll be keeping a very close eye on those. There's a screen grab here from an online event that we held back in December. We had an open letter to the government about stopping cruel imports, so stopping trade deals that would fail to meet domestic standards of animal welfare, environmental protection and food safety. We got a really incredible 77,000 signatures from supporters, which was a fantastic result. And we held this high profile event featuring various speakers, political speakers, and some of our high profile supporters and volunteers. It was wonderful. Worth bearing in mind that although we've had major disappointments with the trade bill and not seeing that level of scrutiny, every new deal that is going to be negotiated will be an opportunity for us to call for that scrutiny on a case-by-case basis. And for a lot more information on this, there's so much more detail we could be going into. Please do visit our website, ciwf.org.uk/trade. There's some really useful information on there. So, crucial issue here that kind of underlines everything that we're all doing in this campaigning space to help animals, animal sentience. So the ability of animals to think and feel. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning, this was one of our early victories back in '97 of securing recognition of animal sentience in EU law. So this is the article. It requires governments to have full regard when formulating and implementing policy to the fact that animals are sentient beings. So that's a really important basic requirement. And in 2018, the UK government said it would definitely include animal sentience in UK law post-Brexit, assured us of that. However, 3 years later, after a lot of twists and turns along the way, still no legislation, animal sentience as it stands is no longer recognised in UK law. That's shocking. And we do have a petition running to really flag this up, the urgency of introducing animal sentience in UK law, that recognition and protection for animals, because it's such a base requirement to just note that in formulating any future policy, animals must be treated as though they can think and feel. It's shocking that we're in this situation, frankly. Now, another thing we're campaigning on, I mentioned one of the hallmarks of factory farming is caging animals, so confining them in whether it's crates, whether it's cages, just really small, overcrowded spaces. So in the UK, over 16 million farm animals are caged, as I touched on earlier, where they're confined, constricted, and unable to express their natural behaviours. Now, we have made some progress, and to the right, you'll see Joanna Lumley there, and she appeared in a wonderful video that we produced supporting our End the Cage Age campaign in the UK. And that was to secure a parliamentary debate. It was to support a petition for a parliamentary debate, which did take place in March 2020. And we did have really quite encouraging statements from that debate, saying that the government was committed to its ambition to stop the use, that farrowing crates should no longer be used for sows, and that it was examining the future use of cages for laying hens. At the moment, we've actually got an important 10-minute rule bill coming up that's being presented in Parliament on 10th March about farrowing crates for mother pigs. And if you do have access to this presentation, then there's a link so that you can email your MP if you're based in the UK, and just urge your MP to support that bill to phase out farrowing crates for sows. And yeah, just support that when it comes into Parliament on the 10th of March. And we also have a petition that's got an amazing number of signatures. It's really exciting, of over 427,000 when I last checked yesterday. And we will be handing this in. It's been a bit tricky with the lockdown COVID situation to arrange something high profile for that, but we're really looking forward to honouring all of those vital signatures very soon. And just to quickly touch on the situation in Europe, where over 300 million animals are farmed in cages. A lot of progress has been made. You may have heard of our European Citizens Initiative, where we secured an incredible 1.5 million signatures and submitted those, and that's to end all caging of farm animals. So relatively recently, the European Parliament actually released a report where it was putting forward alternatives, viable alternatives to cages for farm animals, and recognising that our ECI, it really has, it's doable. These alternatives can be put in place, should be put in place, and must be. So that's very encouraging. And we do have a hearing coming up for our European Citizens Initiative that's coming up in April. So watch this space. We're still pushing very hard to translate that huge petition that we launched into massive legislative change to end cages for all farmed animals in Europe. Important as well that Sweden, Switzerland and Norway are 3 of the countries that have banned farrowing crates for sows. So just adding more pressure on the UK government to follow suit. And there was an important vote back in September when Czech MPs voted to ban cages for laying hens. So we can see there is growing momentum heading in the right direction in different pockets of Europe. And, you know, we need to be at the front of that, you know, leading that, if we are to call ourselves a world leader in animal welfare. Okay, so now onto a crucial campaign raising awareness of the world's forgotten farm animals, as I say, and this is our Rethink Fish campaign. So in a lot of the factory farming that takes place of many species of fish, there's a high number of parasites, so sea lice, that feed on their gills, on their organs, and it's really, really horrific to see just the treatment of these farm animals, and it goes unseen. You know, underwater, people aren't aware of this level of immense animal suffering, and huge numbers as well, huge numbers of fish that are produced. And a huge lack of awareness that fish are sentient beings, as I mentioned earlier. Also, in terms of the certification schemes for fish, you'll notice that there are often ticks from the major schemes to show sustainability, so environmental impact. But we picked up on the fact that there was no welfare criteria. So we launched a campaign on that, and we have made progress because 4 out of 5 of the major schemes that we targeted have said that they are now planning to introduce welfare standards, which is encouraging. It's all steps forward. And as I mentioned earlier, a massive issue with non-stun slaughter of fish. So for instance, a lot of fish are suffocating to death, and it's horrendous. It's simply not acceptable. Important to zone in terms of the UK context on salmon farming. So there we've got widespread disease and deformities. These animals that would be travelling thousands of miles in the wild are confined in these barren cages, swimming around and around, just bored, endlessly bored. Salmon farming is really damaging the surrounding environment as well. Health hazards, you've got dead fish that are dumped in open pits, and that's exposed to surrounding wildlife. And despite all this, the industry is set to double in size by 2030. So this is something that we are taking action on. We're calling for a moratorium on expansion of the salmon farming industry. And fish meal as well. So this is feeding wild fish to farmed fish and to livestock as well. So shockingly, 1/4 of all wild caught fish are used to produce fish feed. And 90% of the fish used to produce fish meal and fish oil could be fed to humans. So again, we've got this huge, colossal waste of life and waste of resources as well from that standpoint. It's just shocking. Now, just to go on to live exports briefly. So we've still got, although the numbers have reduced a lot from then levels, when we were campaigning on this back in sort of the 80s, the 90s, and back in the 90s, there were 2.5 million animals exported from the UK every year. Now, thanks to our campaigning and the huge support of supporters over the past few decades, those numbers have really declined. However, we're still talking about tens of thousands of animals forced to endure grueling journeys to the continent. So welfare issues include enduring extreme temperatures, so incredible heat and then freezing temperatures as well, exhaustion, dehydration, overcrowding, illness, injury, and even death in transit as well. And even right now, there are horrific stories about export journeys at the moment and the conditions for animals. You know, it's very topical. We're seeing scandal after scandal. So it's something that we're very passionately campaigning on in the UK and worldwide. It's important that once exported from the UK, they lose our domestic animal welfare legal protection. So for instance, they can be exported onto Europe, so to Spain, and then onto the Middle East, where we know that the conditions in which they can be slaughtered fail to meet standards here. We've seen some horrendous footage even very, very recently. We have made progress in campaigning to end live exports of farm animals. So we had a judicial review last year, and that helped to halt live calf exports from Scotland. It applied so much pressure, and a huge thanks to everyone who supported us with that campaign. At the moment, well, just a few days ago, the UK government's consultation on ending live exports from and through England and Wales closed. And that it's a huge step forward that they launched that consultation, and we're going to be pushing very hard with our supporters' help to make sure that translates into a real ban at long last on the trade. There's also a Scottish government consultation that's just closed, and shockingly they didn't even include proposals to ban the trade from Scotland in those. So a key thing that we want to do in terms of our next step is to first of all urge the UK government to deliver on this promised ban, and urge the Scottish government not to stand in the way and to follow suit and ban live exports from Scotland, so that we can have a great British live export ban and end the trade truly across all of Britain. And I mentioned earlier antibiotic overuse. So shocking statistic here, over 70% of all antibiotics are used in farm animals, and that use is mostly routine, so it's to prop up these intensive systems that would otherwise make animals sick, where they're crammed into these tiny spaces, breeding grounds for disease. And the only way to prevent that is to keep pumping these poor animals full of these antibiotics. So as I say, dirty, overcrowded conditions. And their overuse in farming is contributing to the spread of drug-resistant bacteria in humans. So a huge risk for human health here, major risk. Some good news, the EU is banning this routine preventative use of antibiotics in farming from 2022. The UK is now lagging behind, we need to catch up. We're also facing, as I mentioned earlier, with trade deals. So we've got countries like the US, who we're negotiating with, still using growth promoters. So we need to be very careful here that we're not going to be importing products that have been produced using antibiotics that wouldn't be legal here in the UK, that don't meet our standards. And we've heard a lot about chlorinated chicken and hormone treated beef as well. Those have been, they've received a lot of press coverage. So this is a very hot topic. And Compassion is part of the Alliance to Save Our Antibiotics, campaigning to end the routine and preventative use of antibiotics in farming. And there's a webinar coming up on Thursday, actually, and it's on UK farm antibiotic use. So there's a little link there in case you want to check it out. And in November each year, we have an Antibiotics Awareness Week as part of that collaborative campaign. So labelling. This is a really important campaign that has quite a widespread appeal, because so many people, even when I say I work for Compassion in World Farming, they say, you know what annoys me? When I go to the supermarket, I don't know how to choose a higher welfare product from a low welfare product. How am I supposed to know? The labels are so confusing. And so we had this statistic from a survey a couple of years ago. 80%, so 8 out of 10 shoppers want to know how the animals have been reared. And that's a very natural thing. Where has your food come from? You want to know. And just a little example here, the top right, we had a campaign stunt a couple of years ago where it was a street art stunt where we simulated a Banksy style. We arranged for that to be painted up in Birmingham, and then spread a bit of gossip online, essentially. Got this idea trending, could it be the next Banksy in Birmingham? But actually it was us, and we were showing how it was a way of communicating this idea of mislabeling. It's very hard to tell the true origins of something. It can be labeled as something else, and that's why in the image you might be able to see it says all natural, and it's an image of an upturned trolley on a piglet. So that was just an example of the kind of creative campaigning we sometimes need to do to really raise awareness. So our campaign is for mandatory method of production labelling for all meat and dairy products, because consumers deserve to know the truth about how their products have been, how the animals have been treated. And Michael Gove pledged gold standard labelling, and this was a good couple of years ago now. And so we're continuing to push for that to translate into a labelling scheme that makes it really easy and clear for consumers to know exactly how an animal has been reared. And that consultation should be coming up very shortly. So we'll be putting a lot of pressure on the government there, as I say here. So just a little bit of an example about our solution, our proposed solution. So we came up with this matrix that you'll see on the right, and all of this is available on our website. to dig into a bit deeper, ranging from intensive indoors right the way to organic and pasture fed. And that's of course what we recommend that all consumers opt for. And some success stories of labelling. Well, free range egg sales, that's a really good model to follow. So when method of production labelling was made mandatory on whole eggs back in 2004, sales of free range eggs, they catapulted, and they're so incredibly high. They take up the majority of the market today in terms of whole egg sales. And it's triggered this real momentum with more and more corporate commitments to introducing labelling schemes. So we've got just some examples there from different countries in the UK and overseas that have signed up to make it easier for customers to know exactly what they're buying. We've got a petition as well that's now reached over 100,000 signatures, and this is, as I say, supporting our call for the government to introduce mandatory method of production labelling on all meat and dairy products. So in summary, we need systemic change. We need to transform this obviously broken global food system in order to save people, animals, and the planet, all of us. And that's all about ending factory farming and instead eating less meat and dairy, eating more plant-based foods, choosing higher welfare produce when we are consuming meat and dairy, adopting nature-friendly farming systems and practices that support nature and regenerate our soils, protect our soils. And we've got some major opportunities coming up. So there's the UN Food Systems Summit on the horizon. We've got the Conference on Biological Diversity. We've got COP26. We've got major work that we're doing at Compassion with corporate commitments on all sorts of different elements of fighting biodiversity loss in the products that different food companies are producing and supporting. And ultimately, we want to secure a global agreement to end factory farming. So we're making huge headway with the support of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in the UK and all over the world. We're so incredibly grateful, and we need your support moving forward to end factory farming for good. And you know, we're closer than ever, and we're going to get there together. So that's all from me, and thank you so much for your patience in listening to that whistle-stop tour of all the many issues with factory farming, but a vision for the future where we're no longer seeing this level of suffering.
Thank you so much, Natasha. That was really, really enlightening. And I totally agree with you. What you just told us there, there's not just one problem with factory farming, there are in fact many. And thank you so much for highlighting all of those. And not only highlighting the problems, but highlighting the ways that we can get involved with the solution. So I think you touched on there that the UK kind of prides itself as a nation of animal lovers, leading the way in terms of animal welfare. But what you've actually showed us today is that we are lagging behind in some areas. And, you know, this is something that we all need to get behind as consumers, as governments. And now that, you know, obviously Brexit has just happened, we're in this very kind of challenging time where we're trying to hammer down our new policies and procedures, and we need to make sure that they're done correctly. So thank you so much for giving your input on that. That was really, really interesting.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, hello everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here today taking part in this webinar. And may I congratulate you, Natasha, on a superb presentation. I'm also very proud to be a patron for Compassion in World Farming, and I applaud all the imperatives that are being driven by such a good and compassionate charity. I think that, you know, we human animals are extraordinary because we are the ace predator and we are brilliant, but I think we are also unique in that we are possibly the only species that colludes in our own disaster. And by that I mean we contribute to all of the factors that are destroying our planet, which are entirely to do with all of the elements that Natasha has touched upon there in terms of what we eat. Factory farming, intensive animal agriculture, an appalling lack of compassion in relation to how we actually get food onto our plate. And I have, because I'm old enough to remember rationing and the beginning of intensive animal agriculture. I was born just after the Second World War, when there was a huge shortage. And of course, I suppose intensive animal agriculture was necessary at that time to feed the nation or feed the world. But we have grown far beyond that now, and all it is a way for corporations to make a huge profit by producing huge amounts of meat for consumers to have at the lowest price possible, which of course does cut out every kind of human compassionate value in terms of how we treat the animals, all animals that we share our planet with. I also have got to a point in my life now, and I know that we have to use terms like animal welfare because they are embracing terms that draw people in, and it's very important for the movement to win hearts and minds. But for me, animal welfare actually is a total misnomer, because you can't have animal welfare without animal rights, just as you can't have human welfare without human rights. And this is the thing that frightens everyone, because once one gets rid of this ridiculous concept of dominion, that we as human animals have dominion over all other animals on this our wonderful planet, once we really start to relate to that, this sense that we own every other animal on this planet, we own the planet, which of course we don't. I mean, we should be guardians of our planet, as we should be guardians of all the species that share our planet and do contribute, as was shown by what in Natasha's presentation, how with careful management, our planet will be healthy. And if our planet is healthy, we human beings will be healthy. So I believe very, very firmly that we have to recalibrate how we relate to all, not only human animals, but specifically all other species. Like, we need to treat all other animals how we treat our companion animals. You know, we look at our dogs and our cats and we say to ourselves, can I eat my dog or my cat? Is it right for me? Of course, in Southeast Asia, that happens. There's billions of animals that are consumed and killed in the most appalling ways for the table. So in terms of embracing the greater population and relating to, are we really an animal-loving nation? Are we really an animal-loving world when we eat so many animals, and as Natasha says, billions of fish as well, reared in the most appalling circumstances? So from my point of view, I have now lived a life that is the most clearest way for me to relate to, firstly, the gateway of animal welfare, but going into the more important room of animal rights, the right to life. And the only way for me to understand that and to live my life in a way that it relates to all of the levels of compassion that are important to me is to be vegan, and to be an ethical vegan, to be kind, and to not destroy anything. Now, that it may sound a total contradiction in terms of what we're discussing today, because Compassion in World Farming is a great charity and works towards a more humane way of producing meat, with care and with the 5 freedoms. And of course, I have to applaud that, because we know that the planet, our planet, is not going to become vegan in my lifetime, or maybe in your lifetimes as well. But that has got to be I think, the focus, the direction that our planet has to take for all of the very, very real and scientific reasons that Natasha has touched upon in her wonderful presentation there. So I don't want to sound like an emotional bubblegum here, but I think the only way we can deal with all of the problems of our planet is to examine how we treat all other species, to get rid of the sense of dominion, We do not own all other species. They are there to share our planet with us and to share it in the most constructive way. And we have to lose this concept that another animal's body becomes my meat. It belongs to me. I buy it. I can eat it. It is self-destruction, that.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's clear in any way, that's where I am as far as this is concerned.
No, thank you so much for your thoughts on that, Peter. I think what you touched on there is highlighting all of our different perspectives here, and how actually, as different organisations and different individuals, we can come together for a common cause here, and it's something that we're all fighting for and we're all passionate about. So thank you very much for your input on that. And we will come back to that topic of speciesism a little bit later. I'm just going to jump in here now and introduce myself and the work of Goodheart Animal Sanctuaries, which is a farm animal sanctuary based in Worcestershire. We are a relatively new charity. We were founded in 2017, and our whole ethos, whole aims are to provide better lives for rescued animals. So this is something that, as I say, we're all quite passionate about, we're all working towards, and in particular, we want to improve the lives of farmed animals. So we do this in 3 ways. We rescue farmed animals from harm and neglect, and in a second I will go over a few key cases, some of the higher profile rescue cases which have really touched us, and those species, those individuals are now ambassadors for their species, which I'll come on to in a second as well. We also like to get involved in campaigning, so this is through lots of various means, and this is a great example of our campaigning efforts, working with other organisations such as Compassion in Wild Farming, who, as you have seen in Natasha's presentation, have got a wealth of positive change and compassionate legislation behind them. They are leading the way to improve standards for farmed animals, and that's what we're all about as well. And my job at the sanctuary is actually to educate. So I'm head of the education program there, and I also lead the visitor program. So one of our key drivers for change is connecting with the public and building these positive relationships between our animal ambassadors and members of the public to promote compassionate change. So I'm just going to show you a little video now which will introduce the sanctuary site. Hopefully you'll see some lovely imagery of our rescued animals, and you'll get to have a much better idea of what we're all about and what our site actually looks like. So you've just seen a lovely video there showing our sanctuary site as a whole, and I hope you'll agree it's a lovely space for our animals to be. One thing that we really pride ourselves on is providing excellent standards of care for our animals. So whether that is providing lots of space for our animals, lots of opportunities for them to engage in natural behaviours, all of it combines into a life worth living for that animal. So that's what we're really passionate about. What I would like to touch on now is a few of our key rescue cases. And as I was saying, these animals are now ambassadors for their species because they are living out the life that all farmed animals could be living if provided the right level of care. So in 2018, Goodheart rescued 6 male cows from the dairy industry. And you can see one of those over on the right there. They arrived in a really poor and sorry state. They were incredibly underweight, severely dehydrated, and suffering from ringworm and diarrhea. They were actually intended to enter the veal trade, and we had the opportunity to rescue them and allow them to live out their lives in peace and comfort at Goodheart. Now, as I say, these animals are now ambassadors for their species because, as you can see, they've grown into lovely adults here. They're enjoying their lives, and this is a total contrast to what would normally happen in industry, because for those of you who aren't aware, as Natasha spoke about earlier, males born into the dairy industry are commonly deemed worthless. So with this in mind, many farmers actually deem it more financially economical to kill the cow at birth, the young male at birth, rather than allowing him to live. And obviously this is atrocious, and we believe that all animals deserve the right to live. And now we have our rescued calves who are, you know, wonderful characters, wonderful individuals, and we tell their stories to the visitors that come to our sanctuary site. This is another key rescue case. So Dilly, bless her, arrived at Goodheart in December 2020, and she was rescued from an intensive egg laying farm. So as Natasha spoke about earlier, although barren cages have been banned since 2012, in the UK they are still using something called enriched cages, which actually are not enriched at all. They're very overcramped still. A hen still only has enough space for the same size as an A4 piece of paper. And they're susceptible to lots of injurious hen pecking, and that stressful, overcramped environment actually leads them to have severe feather loss. They can have severe joint issues. They can suffer from something called egg yolk peritonitis, which is an infection when they're trying to lay an egg, but it gets stuck. Lots of health complications here, which actually we believe most people are not aware that this is the reality of a UK-based egg farm. And it all comes back to that transparency in marketing, which Natasha was talking about. So this is something that we are trying to highlight, trying to educate, and we're actually working with an organisation called the British Hen Welfare Trust to highlight the plight of these animals. And just to show you how Dilly is doing now, this is just a few months later, and you can see, given the right environment, given the right space and care, she has actually transformed into a beautiful young hen who's got hopefully a long life ahead of her. Peter, I know we were chatting earlier about experiences with farmed hens. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience with chickens in this environment?
Yes, well, very recently I visited a chicken facility. There were 6 hangars, basically, like the size of an airplane hangar. And I went to film in the night, it was about 1 in the morning, black as pitch outside. And inside the hangar, there were 26,000 2-day-old chicks in bright light. They live in bright light for 18 hours a day. And they live in these hangars for 6 weeks, 42 days, and then they are fat enough to be slaughtered. What was so shocking, apart from the dreadful smell, was the floor was littered with 2-day-old chicks who had died from shock within hours of being placed in this hangar. And these little balls of fluff that would fit in your hand, it was just heartbreaking to see them just lying strewn all over the floor. They write into their business plan that they will lose 25% of these chicks within about a week or 2 weeks of them being introduced. So here there were 6 hangars, 25,000, that's 150,000 chicks that will live their short lives in these hangars. If I had returned later, I would have also seen chickens that were so fat they couldn't walk, that would be lying in their own effluents, and other appalling conditions that arise from factory farming. And the fact that these poor little creatures will know their feet will never touch the ground. They're on a concrete floor that's covered in sawdust. Everything is used, of course, because the sawdust and the chicken waste is then used as a form of fertilizer. But what was so shocking was just to see this total disregard of life and sentience. And as you can see in these one wonderful photograph of the hen when she arrived at Goodheart, and now how beautiful she looks now that she has been given a life. And you know, this is so people can have their chicken burgers and their sweet and sour chicken and stuff like that. It's absolutely disgusting. It's horrible. And I believe that we produce something in the region of 1 billion chickens per year in the UK alone. So you can imagine the enormous waste and the horror that these poor creatures live through in order to provide a burger. It's horrible.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, and that is, as I say, something that we try and highlight at the sanctuary when we have our visitors. We just try and open up the discussion, because I think the issue is many people are actually unaware that this is what animals are going through. And it's all about opening up that conversation and just letting them make an informed, evidence-based decision.
There's also, I think, as well, and I know this is a bit extreme, but then I have reached a point in my life where I am extreme. I only have to support my own beliefs. I don't have to support the beliefs of a charity or whatever. You know, it is this sense of people saying, well, I don't mind eating animals if they've had a good life. Well, what's that got to do with it? If they've got a good life, let them extend their life so they can do what we want to do, which is to carry on our lives as long as possible. I mean, that's where I get kind of locked out of this whole concept of animal welfare as opposed to animal rights. I mean, once one actually believes firmly in animal rights, you believe in the right to life. And that means you're not going to kill them and you're not going to eat them.
Thank you, Peter. I'm just going to actually talk to you about one of our main mechanisms of promoting compassionate change now at our sanctuary site. So I totally agree that it's all about, you know, just raising awareness and allowing people to consider animal rights as well as animal welfare, and the distinction between the two, because they are quite different when it comes down to it. I'm going to show you a few images now and tell you share a few testimonials of our visitors from last year. So at Goodheart, we actually open once a year to the general public for our annual summer fair. This is quite a large event. We tend to get a couple of hundred people to the site. It's a very positive event with a great atmosphere, and the public can meet the animals and engage with our messaging. But something that we started doing for 2020 as a response to COVID-19 was smaller meet and greet experiences for small groups of up to 6 individuals. Now, what we found was that the quality of the visitor experience was actually greatly enhanced. And that was because we had a much more personal relationship, greater engagement with the visitors. This included educational discussion, sharing personal experiences, and demonstrating best practice animal husbandry. What we actually found was that we improved our supporter base dramatically, and many of the people who came to visit us were they left saying that they were thinking about things differently. They were reconsidering their intake of meat and dairy. So we were literally having, you know, instant turnaround, instant impact from these visits, and that was really great for us to hear. So this is something that I wanted to share with you guys today, something that's working for us in terms of promoting compassionate change. So here you can see our lovely rescued Jersey calves. They're all fully grown up now, but they're good as gold, and they love attention from all of our visitors. And I just want to talk about our responsibility here. So as a farm animal sanctuary, we have a responsibility to highlight the connection between the food on our plates and the animals that we rescue. So I firmly believe that there is a disconnect in many people's minds about the food that they're eating and the animals out there in the pasture. So this is something that I really try and strengthen when we're leading the visitor experience. So I've just got a few testimonies here that I would like to share with you. And just a quick note to say that some of the images don't match up with the specific reviews. So here this is last year, and two of our lovely visitors came to meet Olive the pig. Olive had a very special story actually, because her mother Salt came to us as an RSPCA referral case. She was kept in inappropriate conditions and she was suffering. On arrival, it transpired that she was pregnant. We actually have a no breeding policy at the sanctuary. We would never breed our animals because we believe there are, you know, far too many farm animals in the world already. And so it was quite a surprise for us when she gave birth to 10 adorable piglets. But you know, these piglets are the lucky few because they get to live out their entire lives at the sanctuary site in peace and harmony, in a wonderful environment, you know, with their mother. So here we have Olive, who was just in the barn for a bit of rehabilitation. She had hurt her leg, so she was just on barn rest for a couple of days. And as you can see, she's enjoying a lovely belly rub there. So here is one of our reviews. I'm just going to read this aloud to you. It was clear that all the staff had a deep connection with the animals in their care, and they were generous in sharing stories about the personalities and character of each of them. By the end of the visit, we felt as if we knew the animals personally. We will be back. And I think this is a really good example of just going to show how that individual connection can really have a massive impact on people who kind of disregarded farm animals in the past. They start to see them in a different light, and that's what we're all about at Goodheart. Here is Bob the sheep, he was an orphan lamb, and he came to us, and our farm sanctuary manager hand reared him, bottle fed him through night and day, and he is an absolute sweetheart. I love him to bits. And he's still at our sanctuary now, obviously, and he is one of our most popular animals at the sanctuary, I'd say, because he is so friendly. Just another quick testimony here. It was great to see the animals in their gorgeous and stimulating environment. Catherine was a fantastic host, clued up not just on the ins and outs of the farm, including its inhabitants' personal story, but also on the features of their species and industry practices. The personal connection to the cause is obvious and runs deep into the core of the staff. I thoroughly enjoyed our time there, and I think it made a mark on my thinking too. So, you know, this is excellent because it goes to show that our visitor experience is having a positive impact on consumer-driven approaches to meat and dairy. So, you know, this is something that we want to promote to other sanctuaries around the UK and around the world as well. Having a positive experience with these animals, as well as teaching them about the horrible practices involved in factory farming, really goes a long way to changing their thinking. Here's just another review just to highlight how the visitor experience might be slightly different to something you've seen in the past. So we were able to interact with the animals with clear and safe boundaries in place whilst respecting their environment. We learnt a lot and came away educated and inspired. Thank you again for a brilliant day. So here again is touching on the environment that we provide our animals. We are allowing them to engage in their natural behaviours. So this could be pigs rooting around in the mud. It could be chickens dust bathing to protect their feathers, and just allowing the animal to live out its natural life as it should be in the wild. And finally, last testimony I'd like to share. The animal enclosures and knowledge given is second to none, especially the pig woodland. You can clearly see how content the animals are. I urge anyone who strongly believes in animal welfare to visit or donate. So this is highlighting one of our projects that we're really proud of. This is the pig woodland. And as I'm sure you're all aware, in the wild, pigs, wild boar, will live in a lovely deciduous woodland habitat with many opportunities to scratch around, root around and build nests. Compare that to a factory farming situation where they're kept in very cramped, barren, slatted floor systems. This is just totally opposite to what they deserve, what they are inherently built for. So what we wanted to do at Goodheart was to mimic that wild environment, to allow them to live their lives out in a more natural and stimulating way. So that's something that we're really, really proud of, and something that we highlight when our visitors come to the sanctuary. Just touching here on something that I think we as Goodheart do a little differently to any of the other farm sanctuaries in the UK. We have a really strong focus on education. So my background is actually in secondary school science teaching. So I qualified as a teacher and I taught environmental science, biology, physics and chemistry. And when the opportunity arose to join Goodheart, I thought this was brilliant because we're combining things here that will really engage kids. And it's something that we need to learn more and more about in the future as we want to change our policies, we're introducing new procedures. So my method of education at the sanctuary is very hands-on, very engaging, and it's quite often working with the animals themselves, but tying that all into climate change, sustainability, and how you as an individual can make a specific impact. So here we're actually making some enrichment toys for our rescued pigs. And this is something that, you know, we teach the visitors about enrichment. You know, some people are totally unfamiliar with enrichment and what that means. And it's about providing a really nice and stimulating environment for the animals. So if you're suddenly aware of what enrichment is, you instantly know that they should be offered those opportunities in farmed systems. And at the moment, in factory farming systems, they are not. So it's just those small drip feeding bits of information. And we also offer some animal assisted therapy work. We use our friendliest animals who are very happy to engage with the public and enjoy interacting with humans. We find that they can actually build confidence and self-esteem in some individuals. And we're very lucky to have a lovely educational space. So this is my classroom at the sanctuary site. It's a really lovely space, and we welcome primary schools, secondary schools, special schools. So if any of you watching this are interested in visiting the sanctuary for an educational visit, please do get in touch. I'll leave my email address at the end. For one final testimony, I think this was shared after an outreach session that I did for the boys' school, and the teacher at the end came up to me and said, "We and the boys thoroughly enjoyed the session. I think it really made them think about future food choices." A number of them said they would go home and discuss alternative plant-based diets. And again, I just think this is brilliant because these kids are, you know, 11, 12 years old, and they're going home and talking about it to their parents. We're starting the conversation. And I think we're moving away from the era of not talking about our food and, you know, disassociating animals from food. And now we're really embracing it, which I'm really passionate about. So just to summarise the visitor experience then, what we have found is that our visitors strongly connect with our rescued animals when following this guidance. Keep your group sizes small. So this allows personal bonds to be made with staff and animals and really provides a quality experience. You also want to combine physical experiences with good, deep knowledge. So visitors appreciate a good level of staff knowledge regarding species, animal behaviour and the agricultural industry. So it's really worth your time to get clued up and inspire others with your own knowledge and passion. And finally, we give it evidence of best practice animal husbandry. So we're always talking about the level of veterinary care that we provide, levels of enrichment, how we look after our animals' mental well-being as well as their physical well-being. So one responsibility that I think we as educators, as communicators have at our charity is to highlight the importance of individual choice. So many visitors seem disheartened when they learn of the detrimental impact that animal agriculture is having on our planet, our health and the animals involved. So our role is to explain that actually you as an individual can drive positive permanent change. So one thing that we try and do is highlight the difference that just one person can make, So if just one person went vegan for a day, they would save 5,000 litres of fresh water, 30 square foot of forested land, 20 kilograms of grain, and 9 kilograms of CO2 equivalents. So that could be other greenhouse gases such as methane. And I think this is, just so telling. There are so many benefits to reducing your meat and dairy intake and adopting a more plant-based lifestyle, not only for the animals, not only for your health, but look at the impact that you can have on the environment as well. And obviously this is not forgetting one animal's life. So every meaty meal that you eat, that is one animal's life. And the more that you can reduce that, the less suffering involved, and the greater benefit for the environment and your health. Now, we were really, really inspired by a report released by Chatham House a couple of weeks ago called Food System Impacts on Biodiversity Loss. And Tash really hit on this when she was going through her presentation, because the wider implications of factory farming are not just on the animals themselves, but the much broader net is cast, which includes deforestation, biodiversity loss, zoonotic disease, which is diseases that can transmit between animals and humans, and also the shocking standards of welfare. So if you're interested in some further reading, I would definitely encourage you to go away and read this report. It's really, really interesting. And finally, I was just doing a little bit of digging really to see how consumer trends have changed over time. And this report was released by IBM last year. And it's basically looking at what is driving people's choices when they choose their food and choose their products. And one thing that I really wanted to highlight was the fact that 45% of consumers think that it's very important that the products they choose are sustainable and or environmentally responsible. On top of this, 57% of consumers are willing to change their purchasing habits to help reduce negative environmental impact. So what does this mean? This gives us hope. Consumers want sustainable change. As consumer demand shifts to a more environmental focus, so must our methods of production. And finally, governments have a moral responsibility to incentivize sustainable production. So I think that comes back to what Natasha was saying earlier about the Agricultural Act and how governments are now incentivizing sustainable production, which is brilliant. So we all need to pull together and work towards this common cause. So just very quickly to summarise then, just want to highlight some of the projects that we're working on at Goodheart and ways that you can get involved to support us if you're interested. So in the future, we are going to complete our new Home for Rescued Hens project, which as you can see here is going to be a fantastic facility which will enable us to rescue up to 160 hens from industry at any one time. So obviously, as the years progress, we can rescue not only 160, but thousands of hens in the future. This is a wonderful facility and we're hoping to complete next year. We're also in the process of completing our pig barn and woodland project. So if you'd like to find out more about that, please do head to our website. And we are kickstarting a brand new outdoor education program, which will be led by myself. So if you're interested in learning more or supporting about any of these projects, please do head to our website, which I will include in the comments below. And it's www.goodheartanimalsanctuaries.com. So thank you very much. That is my section of the webinar complete. And I'm now going to hand over to Peter Egan, who actually visited Goodheart in 2018 and is a patron for our charity as well. So he's a patron of both Compassion in Wild Farming and Goodheart. So thank you very much for joining us today, Peter.
It's a great pleasure. And that was just, again, wonderful to visit the sanctuary through your presentation there. And you're doing such sensational work. I was overwhelmed when I visited there a couple of years ago, and to see these lovely, they're dairy cows, are they, that I'm looking at there? They were just so beautiful and gentle. But to see so many different animals roaming freely and enjoying their lives, doing what they should be doing, which is being happy and living their lives. It was a truly inspiring experience for me as well. And it's interesting and it's wonderful to see that families are going there and that they are being affected by their relationship with the animals that they meet. You see, it is so coercive, this journey that we all experience from childhood to adulthood, in terms of how our compassion is actually filtered out of us. Because, no children want to kill animals. Children want to see animals, play with them. All children have their favorite animal, whether it be a bear or a farm animal that they take to bed and cuddle. And that gives them a comfort and a sense of personal relationship other than the relationship they have with their human parents or whatever. What happens is that parents, without knowing it, start changing that attitude by feeding their children animals. This kind of coercion starts. So you can play with a rabbit at the same time as eat a rabbit. And when you have that disconnect, it hardens your natural compassion. And I think it's wonderful that you have a situation at Goodheart where parents come with their children and they will automatically have the conversation. If I am stroking this pig, is it right that I have ham or bacon? Because that's where it comes from. What happens because of food production is you lose contact with what is on your plate and where it comes from. But it comes from a living creature. What you see is a neatly packaged bit of meat, and you forget where it comes from. So sanctuaries like yours are vital. And of course, the work that Compassion in World Farming is doing is vital.
Okay, so we've received a couple of questions, which I'm going to put to our panel now. The first one is a very poignant question indeed, and I'm going to be passing this over to Natasha from Compassion in Wild Farming. So, Natasha, how do we encourage and demand higher standards of welfare for farmed animals from organisations like Red Tractor and the RSPCA? These organisations are given access to factory farms and yet still allow cruel, unhealthy confinement, tail docking and teeth clipping without painkillers and denial of any natural behaviours. Am I right in thinking that they allow all these to continue as acceptable practice and even endorse these animal food products?
Right, so I think my answer is twofold. Number one, and this touches on what I was chatting about earlier with our honest labelling campaign, it is the number one most effective thing we can do to enact change in terms of improving the standards, so that then we know that we're buying higher welfare produce and having that chain reaction, is to call for government change. So to introduce government legislation that says, here is the labelling that indicates if you are buying an intensively farmed animal versus an organically farmed animal. And then when you have that clarity for consumers, the consumer demand for the free-range, organic, pasture-fed options, we can see that it does increase. And a good case study for that is with cage-free eggs. So after the introduction of mandatory method of production labelling for whole eggs back in 2004, when the government put in force that legislation, sales of free-range and organic eggs rocketed, and they continue to dominate the market of whole egg sales today. Unfortunately, caged, it's got to the point, in fact, that people don't realise that egg-laying hens are still caged, and there are still huge, far too high numbers. No farm animal should be caged, and there are still, I think it's around 37%, so I said that 16 million figure of laying hens that are still caged. However, we are making progress because more and more consumers are making the choice to go for free range eggs as standard, and as a result, big brands, big supermarkets are realizing that it's more profitable, it's beneficial to be stocking those higher welfare products. And then the schemes are, they're under more pressure as well. So when you kind of have to see it as a very interconnected web of government policy, corporate policy and consumer behavior, and everything we do at Compassion is kind of in that loop. And we do actually work productively with food companies and with all labelling schemes, so Red Tractor, RSPCA included, to try to find ways forward. So in our view, we know where we want to get to. We want to get to this vision of farming where every animal enjoys a life worth living and can live as nature intended. You know, can live organically on pasture and roaming free, exhibiting natural behaviours, all of the ones that we've chatted about. To get there, you need to work very closely and in a lot of detail on exactly how you make sort of incremental changes to specific practices and systems of farming. Like, for instance, I gave some examples of farrowing crates. You phase those out. You know, you start with sow stalls, you go to farrowing crates and free farrowing systems. You have to go into a lot of depth about the specific arguments and the economic case that it's viable to have alternatives, and other countries are doing it. And then as part of that entire process of lobbying governments, you work with the individual schemes to make those changes farm by farm. And then the entire system changes, and it's not about targeting individual farms, individual farmers. You know, it's about this systemic change from the top-down government-led approach to legislation, to companies making these corporate changes, and then the schemes being under increasing pressure to up their standards. And it's worth mentioning that the schemes mentioned here, like Red Tractor, for instance, they are making improvements. Of course, we would love to see as quickly as possible that the vision of farming that we're fighting for, that's our mission. It does take time, and that's we're doing our best, and I think it's to be celebrated along the way every time there is a milestone. So every time that for instance, with chickens that are reared for meat, you know, when they are given more light, or they're given more outdoor access, or, you know, every step forward we gain a little bit more momentum. So I just think it's, although there are some major hurdles to overcome, it is important that we see that the only way forward is moving together, and we are doing that, and that is it's a hallmark of Compassion's approach to work with rather than only ever against. And it does work, it is working. We just want to speed up the pace of change, and, you know, not lose this sense of momentum. I hope that gives a bit of an insight to sort of the big picture that we're trying to work with at Compassion on this topic.
Thanks, Natasha. It definitely does, and I couldn't agree more. Every small positive step is worth celebrating, because they all amount to a much greater change. So thank you very much for your insight on that. That's much appreciated. We have another question here for Peter, if that's okay. So Peter, it's clear that you are a voice for many species of animals around the world. Why do you think that farmed animals are sometimes disregarded in terms of animal welfare? For example, many people view their pets in a different light to farmed animals.
Yes, that's an interesting question. And so I think I referred to that in some earlier comments in terms of the compassion we naturally give to our companion animals, and how there is a disconnect between that and the animals that humans choose to eat. And I'm also very aware that during this webinar and the presentations, that I am very much a servant of two masters as far as this is concerned, because I have on the one hand an animal welfare hat that I wear, because even though I believe firmly in animal rights, and that is the hat I wear most of the time, I am aware that one has to have a doorway to intervention. And that intervention is under the hat of animal welfare, because doing the work that Compassion in World Farming does so beautifully in terms of raising and lobbying in Parliament, and working to stop live transport, working for better conditions for animals. Because for me, the simple answer is the reason why people view their pets in a different way to farmed animals is because they think that dogs are different to cows or pigs. And they also want to eat cows and pigs or chickens. So they don't want to become confused by their own feelings. So they create a disconnect for themselves, because when I talk to people who say, oh, well, I'm a great animal lover, I love my dogs, I say, well, would you eat your dog? And they say, no, of course not, I couldn't bear to eat, I couldn't bear it. But I said, but then that means you don't love all the farmed animals. Is that what you're saying? You don't love all the animals that you want to eat? And they will say, no, I have no relationship. They have created a natural disconnected, for want of a better word. And I mention this because perhaps my position may sound confusing in various areas, because on the one hand, I am absolutely, totally committed to animal rights, as I am totally committed to human rights. I feel as compassionate towards human beings as I do towards animals. It's all the same to me. But we are having, and we keep using the term animal welfare. And on the one hand, as I've said, I reject that as a concept because it's, in fact, a way to massage cruelty, if you like. But also, in the same sentence, I would say that animal welfare is the means of intervening, of trying to help the lives of animals that are going to face the ultimate cruelty, which is slaughter. And animal welfare is designed to try and make that journey more acceptable, or less horrible, or less cruel. And of course, because it is inevitable, I have to support animal welfare for that reason, at the same time as rejecting it because I believe totally in animal rights. Sorry, does that sound confusing? Does that sound clear?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
And so people are much ready, will listen to animal welfare much quicker than they will animal rights because they're frightened of animal rights. But the fundamental issue is, do you believe that all other creatures on our planet have a right to life? And if you have a right to life, you won't treat farmed animals any different to your pets.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Peter. And again, this is something that we aim to highlight when people come to visit our farm sanctuary, because we want to form those relationships, so yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. We have one final question, which is actually directed towards our organisation, Goodheart. So someone has asked, what approach do you think is best when it comes to educating the public about the harmful impact that animal agriculture can have, not only on the animals involved, but on our health and our environment? I think this is something that I kind of touched on in my presentation, but what I really want to emphasize here is that we are inclusive as possible. So as much as we recognize that being fully plant-based, being vegan is doing wonderful things to our planet, we don't want to preach to the converted here. We love collaborating with these like-minded, amazing individuals, but actually we want to target the people where we can have lots of change as well. So we welcome everyone to come to our sanctuary site, get involved with our events, with our visitor experiences, with our fundraising, with our educational raising awareness, and don't be afraid to engage with what we're saying. We're not antagonistic at all. We're very open to conversation about this topic, and we're willing to listen as well. So we know that this topic is really controversial and people are very passionate about animal agriculture and about their food. So we recognise that, and we know it's not going to be easy. But what we want to do is be as inclusive as possible and just talk about the many different ways and celebrate the tiny steps, the small steps that each one of us can take to promote compassionate change. So whether that be adopting a fully plant-based lifestyle, as Peter has done, or whether that's replacing your usual bacon butty that you might have in the morning with something else, and starting off by replacing that one meal a week could be the first steps that you need to a much greater journey. So we recognise that, and that's what we want to highlight at Goodheart.
Yeah, I think that's terrific. Can I just jump in there for a second?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I mean, I totally embrace that concept philosophically as well. That's why veganuary is such a wonderful imperative. I mean, there were 600,000 people signed up to veganuary this year. 5 years ago, it was 3,000 people. So the growth is, that's sharing and learning. The growth is exponential, which is remarkable. But I think also people should think, just apart from how the food they eat, how these animals are treated, if those people think that fur-farmed animals are treated in exactly the same way as animals you intensively bred animals for food. So somebody who eats meat may hate fur and say, I could never wear fur. I disagree with all of that. But if you think that the fur animal is treated in exactly the same way as the farmed animal for food. In animal testing, the same thing. They live in cages, their feet never touch the ground. They live appalling lives. So animals in general, once you embrace the fact that all other species on this planet are abused by the human animal because of what they can get from it, intensive animal agriculture for food is the same as all the other stuff as well. So if you object to the other stuff, then start thinking about how you might object to intensive animal agriculture.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, that's definitely highlighted the broader umbrella there, because as you say, we're not just talking about food here, we're talking about lots of different products that we all consume. So yeah, thank you so much for highlighting that. Thank you everyone for joining us today and engaging with us. We all really, really appreciate it. We've got our contact details up on screen here. So if you did want to get in touch about any of the issues that we've discussed today, please do feel free to drop us an email or get us on social media. And of course, if you'd like to leave any comments below, please do so and we will get back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kath and Natasha. It's been great being in your company today. And thank you for everyone else who has participated in this really fascinating conversation.
A huge thanks to Kath for having me today. It's wonderful to speak on behalf of Compassion in Wild Farming and our many, many supporters who allow us to do the work that we do. It's lovely to chat to you, Peter, and hear your fascinating insights as well. And I look forward to visiting Goodheart as well. Those images are just beautiful. So yeah, really wonderful. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and obviously details on the screen. And do check out our website, ciwf.org.uk. Plenty of really useful, interesting information about our campaigns and research and all sorts of things. Thanks very much.